We have new shocking polls for Jill Stein. And the questions that I have for you today are this: will Jill Stein support fully impact Kamala Harris's chances of winning the 2024 presidential election? And two, will the gender gap actually make a difference? We're going to dive into both of those today. But for those of you who are supporting Jill Stein, just like I am supporting presidential candidate Jill Stein, you will be happy to hear this news. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been telling you over and over again that a number of Muslim voters are supporting Jill Stein, and those numbers have continued to increase over time, and she has overtaken Kamala Harris. This new CARE poll that has been released, I think everybody needs to see this. It is the final CARE 2024 election poll of American Muslim voters. And you will see here, this is from October 30th to October 31st. It's a nationwide poll here. Jill Stein is right in the front, ladies and gentlemen, 42.3%. I think the last time we discussed this poll, it was a tie between Jill Stein and Kamala Harris. I think they both were at roughly 29%. You'll see that both of them have increased with Muslim voter support. Kamala Harris is at 41%. Donald Trump is at 9.8%. Chase Oliver, 0.6%. Cornel West, 0.1%. And then undecided is 0.9%. So what is interesting about this, and why I'm very excited for this poll for Jill Stein, this is the first time that I can remember that a third party presidential candidate was ahead of a Democrat or Republican presidential candidate with Muslim voters. So this is historic. At least I like to think so, that this is incredibly historic. And I also want to show you something else. As we dive deeper into this poll here, you'll also be able to see this. It says that when they show you the chart here, so you can see it, right? Like, not only is she ahead of Kamala Harris, and some people will say that this is a tie statistically, but she's still ahead. 42.3%, Kamala Harris 41%. She has found a way to truly make gains within the Muslim voting community. And what does that mean? What does that mean for Kamala Harris presidential campaign? I mean, let's be real, guys. The election is tomorrow. Kamala Harris, and is brought to my attention recently, has not been to Dearborn, Michigan. Now, some of you may be wondering, what do you mean by that? She spoke with the mayor of Dearborn. Yes, she did, but she was never in Dearborn. Donald Trump just went to Dearborn, Michigan. And meanwhile, Kamala Harris has not been to Dearborn, Michigan. All this time that she has been campaigning in Michigan, she's been campaigning in Detroit and in other Detroit suburbs, but she has completely avoided Dearborn, Michigan. And that is very telling. In a way, she's trying her best to avoid those voters. She's not trying to coalesce with those voters. And what I have noticed over time, it seems like Kamala Harris is trying to make gains within the female community in the Dearborn, the Detroit suburbs. So I think what she's been trying to do is to get more women to come out to fill that gap of the Muslim voters that went to Joe Biden in 2020. So she's running on Roe. She's been heavily talking about Roe v. Wade, and that's what she's trying to do. You'll see that a little bit later when we get to the gender gap in this particular race and compare it to the gender gap in 2016. But this has been a problem from Kamala Harris's campaign. It was a problem when Joe Biden was still in this race. But knowing what I just told you, that she never went to visit Dearborn and Donald Trump was just there visiting people in Dearborn, what does that tell you about Kamala Harris and how she will be as a president on this particular issue? I've continued to say over and over again, I believe that Kamala Harris is going to continue this war She's going to continue to give bombs and weapons to Israel, which she does not deny that. She refuses to call for arms embargo, so they will continue to get weapons under her presidency. And she has basically just dismissed the Muslim voting community, which also includes Black Muslims, by the way. Muslim voters are not just Arab American voters. All Arab American voters are not Muslim as well. So we have to keep that in mind. But going back to this survey here from CARE, I want to dive into this video here.
Race for the White House this year. A new survey from the Council on American Islamic Relations shows the Green Party's Jill Stein leads Harris in several key battleground states. Take a look here. The most striking data, however, comes from Michigan, which has a large Muslim population. 40% of Muslim voters say they prefer Stein, with Harris only picking up 12%. Harris tops Stein in Georgia and Pennsylvania, but the Green Party could still pull away some crucial votes.
Look at this. We're just going to pause it here, okay? Jill Stein in Wisconsin, 44%, Kamala Harris, 39%. This is from the Council on American Islamic Relations. Arizona, 35% for Stein, 29% for Harris. Michigan, 40% for Stein, 12% for Kamala Harris. Michigan is the most damning one, I would say. Georgia, 17% for Jill, 42% for Kamala Harris, right? And I think part of that is because some of the leaders of the uncommitted movement are in Georgia and have decided to support Kamala Harris. That could be part of that. Pennsylvania, 25% for Jill, 37% for Kamala. But the reality is Jill Stein is leading Kamala Harris here in 3 of these swing states with Muslim voters. And that is because Jill Stein wants an arms embargo. That is because Jill Stein does not agree with what is happening. And Jill Stein has called what's happening in Gaza a genocide. Kamala Harris does not believe it's a genocide. Neither does Obama. Neither does Bill Clinton. So we can run down the list of names. I don't think Bernie Sanders is really calling it a genocide. So you can see how people just go along with what their party wants. But this is very damning for the Democratic Party. And again, to people like AOC, who wanted to try to roast the Green Party and roast Jill Stein and say, oh, you guys don't get anywhere. You guys don't do anything. They seem to be getting somewhere to me. And there is also going to be a bigger collaborative effort after this election with people like Jill Stein and Shama Sawant for a larger project to continue this. And that's the thing, I've had my criticisms of the Green Party, but I've had those criticisms with Green Party members on this show. So I don't have to make a little Instagram video and just say it to other people. I can say it directly to their face. And I have had those conversations. But at the end of the day, I am not blind to the challenges that a third party presents in this country and what they have to overcome just to get a seat at the table. I'm very well aware of that. I'm very well aware that a grassroots organization versus an organization that's getting a lot of money from big money donors has a harder hurdle to overcome. So AOC wants to leave that information out. And I think it's important that you hear that information. But that explains a lot. And it just goes to show you, you're going to see this video here that we're going to get into of the college students. They are interviewing college students about supporting Jill Stein. Listen to this. I think they were pretty surprised by this.
Who are you guys going to vote for?
Third party for sure. Third party.
You're both voting Jill Stein voters. Yeah. Why Jill Stein? Perhaps why not Kamala Harris?
Because she's supporting a genocide. I can't make that decision to give either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump my vote.
Me as a Muslim American, I'd rather not support a party that would still give money to, something that politically I'm opposed to.
So we know that Donald Trump, when he was running in 2016, literally talked about a Muslim ban. Mm-hmm. And voting for Jill Stein helps Donald Trump. And yet that's where they are.
It is. And I think, I was at the Democratic convention. You were there.
And I have to say just here, I've had that conversation with Muslim voters, and they've explained to me that, yes, of course, the Muslim ban is a big, issue, was a real issue to them, but they see the genocide as a bigger issue. right? Some of the statements that came from them is that, well, Trump wasn't genociding our people, right? So it's not like they're not aware. It's not like they're unintelligent and they don't understand what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. And I say that because some Muslim voters are supporting Donald Trump, but it seems like a good portion of them are supporting Dr. Jill Stein. So again, great for Kamala's, or great for Jill's campaign. But the reality is, at the end of the day, like, these reporters and commentators, they seem to be a little bit surprised to hear that there are a number of people that have told me that they've already voted for Jill Stein. So I do predict that Jill Stein is going to do better this time around than in 2016. What those numbers will look like, we don't know. We'll have to see. But the goal is to get to 5%.
It felt like Democrats thought this issue was settled once Kamala Harris became the nominee, and they no longer had to deal with Biden's sort of tin ear on this issue of Israel. Went to Detroit, went to this campus. Most of the students are from the Detroit area. Obviously, Michigan, about 250,000 Muslim and Arab voters. Probably only 1 or 2% of the vote. But it was really, really hard to find Kamala Harris support on that campus. Those Jill Stein voters, we found them without even looking. Gaza is a single issue. It's the single issue for those students.
Did everybody hear what he just said? Those Jill Stein voters, we found them without even looking. And another warning I want to give to people is, a lot of times third-party candidates are not polled. We're not polled as heavily, or third-party voters are not polled as heavily as Democrat voters, Republican voters, or even independents. Like, I've never been polled. I don't know about you guys, but we are less likely to get that call, especially if we don't have a landline. And I think a lot of us that are millennials don't. But we're less likely to get the call. So that's another thing. I think this is something they underestimated in 2016 as well, where like, oh, Jill Stein's just polling 1% nationally, no big deal. But again, third party voters, we are usually underpolled. So always just keep that in mind. They're shocked.
I left Michigan the other day thinking, okay, there still could be a little bit of an undervote for Kamala Harris in Detroit. They didn't care that much about Donald Trump. They wanted to protest Kamala Harris and the White House's support for Israel.
And yet we know there's also, Melanie, a group of Jews who are very frustrated that the Democrats haven't supported Israel enough, and they're going to be voting for Trump.
I mean, this is a no-win situation for Democrats, whether it was Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. I think the thing that I find really interesting from your interviews, and I'm curious, when you were on the campus, I think there was a question, particularly last spring, when it was this.
We have to push back on the propaganda, and I'll get back to the video. When she says that this was a no-win situation for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we have to push back on that propaganda. There was a win situation for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and that was to issue an arms embargo against Israel. That was to issue a permanent ceasefire and to get end this war, stop the slaughter. There are Palestinians that have been starving since October 1st because Israel once again stopped allowing food to come into Gaza. So not everyone that is dying in Gaza is dying because of bombs. Some of them have died because of starvation. Right. So that is inhumane. So we always have to push back on this type of propaganda when they say, oh, this was a no-win situation. No, honey, there was a win. And the win was to issue an arms embargo and a permanent ceasefire. You have to treat people as though they're human. You cannot treat people as though they are subhuman. And what has been very clear to me by the Democratic Party, whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, they do not see Palestinian, Arab American, Muslim voters. They do not see them as human. They do not see people in Gaza as human. They do not see people in Lebanon as human. They see them as subhuman. Israel calls them animals, calls them creatures. So anything to keep Israel afloat in a legal apartheid state. So push back on that propaganda.
This was lighting up college campuses everywhere. Was this going to be an issue that would be driving Muslim American, Palestinian American voters, or sort of college students more broadly? Would there be sort of a spillover effect? And I'm curious if you saw any of that.
We went to Savannah College of Art and Design in Georgia, private school, art school. A lot of blue hair, a lot of tattoos, a lot of girls in ripped jeans. Gaza came up there. Yeah. And not to the extent that it did in Michigan, where it was the issue, but those students were more likely to talk about Gaza and Israel, less likely to talk about economic issues, health care, gas prices. That stuff came up at the commuter campuses, at the land-grant universities, at the public schools, among the Black and Latino voters. The economy. Gaza felt more like a boutique issue down at Savannah College Art and Design, whereas at Wayne State with the Muslim students, it felt so personal and visceral to them.
Who you guys?
So that's really interesting there, ladies and gentlemen. And again, he talks about those students more interested in the economy at the public universities. Kamala Harris hasn't spent a lot of time talking about the economy, which really is what she should have been doing, talking more about the economy and how her plan was going to change things for the American people. She spent most of this campaign criticizing and bashing Donald Trump instead of focusing on how she's going to fix the economy. And that's a real issue for a lot of people. It's the number one issue for voters. Now, I want to bring you to another story here that you'll see as well, again, on the ground in Michigan. And she is going to explain to George Stephanopoulos here how Muslim voters are feeling as well.
And Gigi, the Arab American vote is not large across the country, but it could be decisive in Michigan.
Absolutely. Michigan is home to the largest percentage of Arab American Muslim voters. And you remember in the primary that 100,000 voters here voted non-committed as a protest vote for the Gaza war. Now, we've talked to Muslim leaders, and many of them say they just can't bring themselves to vote for Harris. We went to a protest yesterday, but Muslim leaders and imams have come out supporting Donald Trump. Some have warned against Donald Trump, saying that he's even more pro-Israel than Harris. And of course, he was the architect of the so-called Muslim ban. We spoke to one Muslim voter, Zina, who says that her family has voted Democrat for 50 years, but that this time she's voting with the independent candidate, Jill Stein. And then one more voter I want to tell you about, George, Ali, a lifelong Democrat. He actually helped open the Obama field office here in 2008. He says his ballot is sitting on his kitchen table. It is unfilled, and he's going to decide on election day. It is a nail biter here, George.
Okay.
Yeah, as we've been warning people, as we've been telling people, one thing I do want to issue a quick correction here, and that was Jill Stein is a Green Party candidate. She is not a independent candidate. So I just wanted to clear that up there. Again, just things that we have continued to warn people about, right? So this is not new. This is not new information. Now, what does that really mean in the grand scheme of things? Of course, Democrats are still somewhat panicking. Some people think that this is going to be a blowout. They think Kamala Harris is going to do really great. There's this poll that recently came out of Iowa, which is showing that she's ahead or possibly ahead in Iowa. It's just that one poll, but apparently that one pollster has a pretty good track record. So there's that as well. So you would wonder, why are they still coming after Jill Stein? And they're throwing attacks her way left and right. The European Green Party also is calling for Jill Stein to drop out. By the way, I want to add the European Greens are more of like liberal, like they're a little bit more Democrat, like they support NATO. Like the European Greens have not been good on core issues that US Greens have been good on. So there's that. There's a lot of attacks coming left and right and left and right. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what does that mean for this race? And I know a number of you have been asking me, who do I think is going to win? Well, the numbers continue to change. But one thing that I want to point to is the gender gap. This is another one that has been discussed while I was away, and I'm glad to be back, by the way. If we look at the gender gap in 2024 between Trump and Kamala Harris, what you're seeing is that Kamala Harris, of course, is leading with women, which is to be expected. And we'll show you this with Hillary as well, because I saw this with Hillary by 52%. And for men, she has 43%. Donald Trump has 44% with women, and with men, he has 53%. So this is not surprising to me. I would expect this. The reality is some women are voting for Kamala Harris because they want a female president. Some have told me this to my face, like, I want a woman. And then there are some that are voting, probably a good portion of them, that are voting because of the overturn of Roe v. Wade. This is very real reality, right? With Donald Trump, again, he's going to have more support from men just because of, some core economic issues. And then also there are some men that want to have a male president. It's just a reality. Now, what does this mean, though? Because right now, and this gap is starting to get closer. Last time when I discussed this, Kamala Harris was ahead of Donald Trump with women, I believe by 12 points, had like a 12-point lead ahead of him. Well, now it is a 8-point lead. So as you see, that gap is starting to close a little bit. This poll was released today, by the way, right? So this article was released today. This is 5:38. So 8-point gap. So we are seeing some movement there, right? And I think some people are referring to the CNN poll that shows like the gender gap among men and women. And that's going to be different than what you see from 538. This is a national poll here, whereas I think the CNN one that I showed briefly was focused on like the swing states. Also a CNN, it's going to be way more left leaning. So it's going to show the Democrat candidate in a better light. Same thing if I showed you a Fox News poll, it's going to show the Republican candidate in a better light. But how does this compare to Trump and Hillary Clinton? If we look at 2016 race, Hillary Clinton had 54% of the female vote and 42% of, hold on, this was done differently. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, Clinton's blue. Hillary Clinton had 54% of the female vote and 41% of the male vote. Let's look at Kamala Harris again. Kamala Harris has 52% of the female vote and 43% of the male vote. So right now, Hillary Clinton had more support from women than Kamala Harris does. Now, it's still early. The election is tomorrow. So that could change for Kamala. But right now, just looking at the numbers, Hillary Clinton is ahead of Kamala Harris with female support, and Roe v. Wade was not overturned at that point in time. So that's very telling. Again, Kamala can still increase that support on election day, which she probably will. And then I'll come back and look at those numbers again, because that'll be very telling. And then when it comes to Donald Trump, at that point in time, he had 42% of the female vote and 53% of the male vote. So let's see where he is now. Donald Trump has 44% of the female vote and 53% of the male vote. So 44% of the female vote now versus 42% of the female vote in 2016. What that also means is that Donald Trump is ahead with the female vote compared to his female vote in 2016. So again, those numbers will probably change on Tuesday, but as it stands right now, Donald Trump has increased his support with women, and Kamala Harris is behind Hillary Clinton when it comes to female support. So that is something I think that is important to take a look at there, because ultimately this could be what decides this election is the gender gap. Obviously, if the female vote continues to increase the way that it is, what that means is that there's a surge of women that are coming out to vote against the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And there is a lot of that has been happening. There are a lot of women that said, no, we got to fix this, that have come out because of that reason, right? So that's why I'm looking at those numbers, and it'll be interesting to see what happens on Tuesday. But there's another factor to this race as well, and that's the independent voters. Right now, Kamala Harris is in the lead with the independent voters. So Kamala Harris's strategy, from what I understand, instead of trying to win over the Muslim voters, was to go after those independent voters, particularly those independent voters that voted for Nikki Haley in the GOP primary, the never Trumper independents, and some of those never Trump Republicans. That's what Kamala Harris is doing. This is why Liz Cheney is on board, right? And I would also say Liz Cheney and a Kamala Harris presidential White House. Just to me, that's a sign that we're gonna have more war. That's a sign that this war in Ukraine is not going to end. That's a sign to me that foreign policy is going to be really bad, and it won't be great, under Donald Trump, but one of the things Trump has said is that he does want to end this war in Ukraine, and he's already had conversations with Zelensky and I believe Putin about that. So that's something to take into consideration. If Kamala Harris continues to lead with the independent voters, and if she increases her support with women on Tuesday, Kamala Harris is going to win this election, because it is going to be very difficult for Donald Trump to make those gains right now. When it comes to early voters, all the signs, there's a lot of positive on the Democrat side with the early voters, the surge of women that came out and voted early compared to years before. But the Republicans can also say, well, look at all the support that we have from men. And they may see that as a plus on their side, that all these men are coming out to support them. We really won't know until Tuesday, but make it very clear, folks, because I know I did the election prediction, but things have changed since then. Kamala Harris is not out of this race. Kamala Harris can still win on Tuesday, especially if what happens, what I predicted could happen, happens. If she, again, gets those independent voters and increases her support with women above what Hillary Clinton had, because Hillary Clinton lost. If she gets more support from women than Hillary Clinton, and she increases that independent voter support, Kamala Harris can win this election. I encourage those of you that are against the genocide to vote and support Jill Stein. I really think that's our best way of breaking this duopoly, because in the end, we all lose. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.